Hello and welcome to the last day of an extraordinary week here at King's Langley School in Hertfordshire, where we've been conducting a range of scientific experiments measuring stress levels across the school. We've been finding out if teachers are born stressed, achieve stress, or have stress thrust upon them courtesy of Year 9. Now, in a survey of over 100 UK jobs, teaching ranks 4th highest in terms of perceived stress. So we decided to find out why teaching is so stressful and what you can do about it. Alom, you were part of the mighty brain that devised this whole week. Were there moments when you wished you hadn't?
I think I managed to annoy one or two of the teachers with my relentless spit collecting. But apart from that, it's been a fantastic week and I think we've got some really interesting results.
Great. Well, I look forward to hearing more about them. Gary Lewis, head teacher of the school here. You've been here for about 4.5 years.
That's right, yes.
Now, what made you decide to let a film crew into your school? Was it a bit of a gamble?
I don't think it was a gamble, really. We're a school that's curious. We're naturally curious about things that are going on around us. I think it's been a great experience. On occasions, it's been stressful, but nevertheless, I think we've all learnt enormously from it.
Now, King's Langley Secondary School was designated as underachieving 4.5 years ago by Ofsted. But it's now, and get this, the 2nd most improved school in England. Gary took over the school just 2 months before that negative Ofsted report. Let's find out a little bit more about him and the school.
I have been here since Easter 2002, so it's just over 4.5 years. It's a mixed comprehensive school, 11 to 18, just over 1,000 students. The school had many difficulties over several years. We relaunched the school. For a school that had previously been in an Ofsted category of underachieving, the last Ofsted inspection for us was utterly crucial. And the level of stress as it rose during that week was frankly enormous.
The whole school was involved, but we followed 8 teachers closely through the week. Emily is new to the profession, loves it so far, but will stress eventually take its toll?
But it is obviously going to be a nerve-wracking experience when you're starting a new job, a new post anywhere.
PE teacher James, though young and fit, may be stressed. But would we ever know from someone who describes himself like this?
Laid back, on the verge of laziness.
Liz used to be a freelance in the cutthroat film industry. But is life as a teacher proving even more stressful?
I'd like to think that I'm not a particularly stressed person, but if you ask my students, they'll probably go, "Calm down, miss."
Jeff has 20 years' experience and is the epitome of the laid-back teacher. Or does that impression conceal years of bottled-up tension?
Towards the side of laid back, I would say. My colleagues might say something different.
Teaching assistant Helen has 3 children and is working towards a degree and probably comes to school for a rest. Does she get it?
I need order, and if I don't have order, I feel chaotic.
Demands on assistant head Chris include management, pastoral and teaching responsibilities across 3 different subjects. Is this taking a toll?
Quite frequently, a whole day will be wiped out by something that you couldn't predict, couldn't see coming.
Karen enjoys teaching enormously, is popular with her pupils and appears to find controlling her classes easy.
Done.
But is it all a front?
Obviously there are days when it's quite stressful, but no, I don't think I am particularly stressed most of the time.
For Tamara, is moving from teaching in Canada to taking classes in King's Langley causing additional stress?
The behaviour of the kids here are actually they're not really that bad, but compared to what I'm used to at home, it's very, very different.
Now, we've been following several staff lined up over here very closely all week. We've brought together a team of experts with a combination of scientific techniques to explore stress in the whole school setting. And one of the most innovative techniques that we used was an intelligent vest. Pisa has been known as a centre of fashionable Italian knitwear for years. But it recently became the place where the world's least stylish designer top was developed. It may not be much to look at, but it is the world's most cutting-edge scientific vest. Designed by the SmartX lab to monitor heart patients at a cost of over £2.5 million, its readings of heart and respiration rates were transmitted wirelessly to a nearby computer. Because the sensors are woven into the fabric, the information can be gathered while the wearer is moving around and teaching normally. Through the vest, we had unprecedented access to our teachers' physiological changes within, which often belied their appearance of complete calm and control on the outside.
The heart rate now it's about 145, which is astonishingly high because that's the sort of levels you would see during exercise, to be honest, quite vigorous exercise.
Gosh.
So maybe not as relaxed as we thought then this afternoon.
7 out of our 8 teachers showed significant variation in their heart and respiration rates. One, who appeared to be totally calm, had consistent signs of dangerously raised heart rate. Now, Mark, we're getting readouts from Jeff's vest there, and his heart rate is showing just over 100. Would you expect to see that?
It's fairly similar to the heart rate that we saw this morning when he was doing his PE class.
But there was another teacher whose physiological readings totally matched his laid-back exterior, whatever the setback or provocation.
Here he is in the changing rooms, which is not exactly the big open wide spaces of the hall he was expecting to be working in. But good on him, he's making the most of this situation.
Have you noticed any changes, Chris?
Physiologically, he's very stable, heart rate's that's impressively low rate, very envious.
So what we've learnt is that teachers are like books. You can't tell much from their covers, and what we actually need is an intelligent vest to decode what's really going on. Now, one of the first teachers to be monitored in the classroom back on Monday morning was Karen Bird. Karen, what did it feel like to be monitored for heart rate, respiration while you were embarking on your class? What did your pupils make of it?
They were quite interested in what was going on, and they were really interested in the laptop with all the data on the screen.
That's right, because not only cameras, you had Gianni from the film there in the classroom working on the computer.
That's right, we did. Yeah, so they were sort of peering over the desks all the time, trying to see what was going on. For me, myself, it was quite restrictive. I had to keep patting it down all the time because it sort of folded a bit. So
you couldn't really forget it?
No, most definitely not. It was not an experience that you could forget very easily, no.
OK, well, let's just take a very quick look at teacher Karen in her English class on Monday when all that data was being collected.
Well, hey. Come on, get some more down. 2 lines isn't enough.
What is the significance of the data that we're getting from the vest? What is it actually telling us about Karen?
Firstly, we've got heart rate. It's a very powerful stress indicator. It's the first thing that really reacts. We've also got respiration rate. When we get stressed, we need more oxygen to supply the muscles. And so that's a very powerful stress indicator.
Right, James. Yeah, done.
Just within the course of the lesson, we have seen changes in Karen's readout.
And what's fantastic about having the readings as well as the video is that on the video she always seems calm and in control, right? But what's very clear is with certain students, her biometric readings are changing. So clearly her feelings are changing, but she's very good at maintaining an exterior of calm and coolness.
Not much there, has to be said.
How much are we meant to do?
About 2 pages.
2 pages.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's think more generally for a moment. Patrick Nash, over here. Patrick, you're Chief Executive of the Teacher Support Network. For teachers in general, is it valuable for them to know where their stress comes from?
It's incredibly valuable. We see about 5,000 teachers a year for counselling, specifically working on issues of stress in sometimes quite extreme situations. One of the first things you can do in going down a journey of understanding and therefore improving your response to stress and indeed your tolerance for extreme situations is to really understand yourself in relation to stress. So I think anything that does that, physically or emotionally, is well worth doing.
OK, now Richard Fawcett, over there at the end of our line of experts. Richard, you were in the observational hide with me, commenting on what we saw. What did you make of our experiment?
Well, I think it was very interesting that what we saw and what was the pattern of data collected tended to tie up very often. We saw people working with students, with groups of students, And as was said earlier, you know, that the interrelationship with them clearly was sometimes not of the easiest, and blood pressure rose.
OK, Emily, shall we have a look and see what's been happening over the course of the morning for you? If I just pop this in here, we should be able to get a readout. Hopefully now your blood pressure will go down. We'd like to sit back to here. At 11 o'clock, was that break time?
That was when I was calling the parent.
Ah, there you go. But that's really interesting, how high it can go at that point in comparison to what you were when we first started, which is, it sounds like it's more like your normal blood pressure.
And I think what was interesting was that we were able to identify patterns, and perhaps, hopefully, as a result of this, might be able to offer some thoughts about how to cope with situations teachers find themselves in.
Thank you very much, Richard. Now, Mark Hamer from University College London, you work looking at physiological indicators of stress in the lab. What was it like actually getting that data from the classroom?
Well, I mean, firstly, what we're trying to collect biological and physiological measures in the sort of natural environment is incredibly difficult. What we do is collect data in a sort of controlled laboratory situation. So it was actually fascinating. What I was seeing was the levels of activation were actually greater, similar if not greater than what we can actually induce experimentally in the lab. So it was, yeah.
And what value was the vest in doing that?
With the vest you can see acute changes in real time. So it's a great value.
Now, Alom, I know you were out and about in PE lessons rather a lot. Two of our teachers, James here and Jeff, take PE at the school. What are the difficulties of measuring physiological indicators of stress when people are exercising at the same time?
Well, one of the problems is that physical exercise produces the same physiological responses as stress. So, for example, stress makes your heart rate go up, but so does running about. So that's why it was so important for us to use other measures to look at their stress levels in particular.
The entire staff of the school took part in 2 questionnaires, one before the Christmas break and one after. And these were to find out stress levels across the entire school. And the idea was to see whether well-being would improve as a result of Chris Gibbons here, providing some well-being tips that could be tried out in the Christmas break. But let's take a look at the gestation of this unusually detailed questionnaire.
Well, one of the key aspects of this study here is that we're testing our teachers on 2 occasions. The first time is at the end of a busy term when many of them are going to be, understandably, very stressed because of that busy time. And we're going to test them again after the Christmas break. And we're looking at the well-being of the teachers on the 2 occasions.
Although the questionnaires were delivered electronically to the teachers, teaching assistants and support staff, Chris also spoke to them directly. He hoped to persuade them to make some lifestyle changes to boost their ability to cope.
We're asking you to think about a number of coping tips or coping strategies between now and when we next see you in early January. Now, the first thing I'd like to think about doing 2 or 3 times a week for at least 10 minutes a time is to find time for you to relax.
Helping Chris with this unique study by compiling the questionnaire was Pat Elliott, who explains the importance of Chris's coping strategies.
We're going to talk about relaxing, time to relax, me time. We're looking at expressive writing, which helps you're actualising something and not let anybody see it. What you do with it is your own concern. We're going to look at perhaps talking about some physical exercise they should be doing. And then we're going to look at laughter. I think laughter is the best medicine.
Now, expressive writing is probably the most powerful psychological intervention we know in terms of helping people's well-being. And what I'm asking you is to do this, but to do it privately, and that's by writing for about 15 minutes on some experience you've had, a positive experience where you felt you achieved or you made a difference. What will be interesting is to see if these coping strategies have an effect on their levels of stress when they're tested a second time.
Did I not come along that row?
The benefit of the questionnaire to the school and to the individual teachers within the school is that we're able to profile the teachers that seem to be coping and coping well under these same stresses compared to those who aren't coping as well, and identify what it is, what factors they have in terms of their stress management that enables them to cope well. And the idea is that that could be shared with the other teachers in the school to enable them to cope better.
So, Chris, What did you find then generally overall in the questionnaires about the school?
Well, we found that 90% of the staff did feel that there were considerable work demands that they were under, and that especially important amongst that was time pressures.
Gary, you listening?
I hope they felt there were demands on them.
Now, in many ways, teaching is quite clear-cut in terms of you're trained to do a task, in terms of teaching, and there's a set number of tasks that you would have thought that most teachers would be able to do very well. And we're finding that certainly is the case here. But also within teaching, there are many experiences that can be a source of a confusion or ambiguity. It might be interpreting a new syllabus, dealing with a particular issue in a class. But what we found here is that the vast majority of the teachers, 88% of them, which is a remarkable figure, actually found that they could cope very well with these demands. And I would take from that that what lay underneath that is the kind of support network there is amongst teachers and the kind of collegiate ethos we see here. Not all the results were positive. There were some messages that maybe the school needs to take away from this. Okay. One of them was that a number of staff felt that what they were contributing to the school perhaps wasn't always being valued from senior management. There was an expression by a number of teachers that they would think about changing schools. In fact, in about 40% of cases, they would consider changing schools within the year.
Right, OK. Well, I think that's an important point that has emerged. Gary, what do you make of that?
I'm not particularly surprised. I'm very pleased about the fact that there's a real sense of a collegiate supportive system at the school, and it's something that's been here a long time, actually. It's not just in recent years. I think it's grown and developed in recent years. And I'm also not very surprised about the fact that a fair proportion are looking to move on. In the area that we are, there's a lot of fluidity, there's a lot of movement in teaching positions. There's a high density of schools, there's a high density area full stop. And we have a lot of younger staff who've been with us 3, 4, 5 years who frankly would be looking for their first or second promotion. So I would like to look at some of the individual figures.
Yes.
There's not many teachers I would like to see moving on, but it will happen.
Now, Richard Fawcett, can I ask you, what do you make of the results there that Chris highlighted, that in general the staff are happy, but perhaps less happy with management really listening to the troops?
Well, you've got the school motto up here, unlocking potential for life, and I suppose what we're doing is unlocking potential for stress. And here you've got the potential which I think many teachers would talk about in their schools, and I think the message for people who are leaders of schools is that there is the opportunity for people to say, be listened to, and then for senior staff to react.
OK. Well, Jill Jordan, let me bring you in now. This school has undoubtedly, well, it must have gone through a lot of changes just in the last 4.5 years. Do you think that could have had an impact on how the staff feel, perhaps a little bit undervalued in places?
I think there's a combination of things. First of all, what was fascinating was watching the physiological evidence, which indicated that actually heart rate and blood pressure were quite high, which, you know, on the outside we're in control and looking, you know, very much the professional teacher, and on the inside we're not. Any change will add to that pressure, and it will depend a lot on whether individuals are welcoming change or finding change a struggle.
Right, interesting. Now, Chris, are there any other general points you would like to pick out before we move on to the specifics?
What really stood out a mile with this group here were the levels of personal achievement.
Working together, 1-0 to me. Oh, 1-0.
The personal achievement was very high for the vast majority of teachers, and that would indicate that they are really fulfilled in the work they do. What was interesting is that actually time 2, when we came to test the teachers again, as a group their levels of personal achievement had dropped markedly. And that would indicate to me that actually it's as teachers, it's in the work you do with the children that you get that sense of feel good, that you get that sense of making a difference.
Now, that strikes me as slightly counterintuitive. I mean, I don't know what people think here, but I would have thought that you come back after Christmas refreshed, feeling a bit better about yourself. But what the questionnaires are revealing that it's actually the other way round. Pat.
We get double the calls to our teacher support line service in January than we do in December. Actually, December, although I think is a very busy time in school, there's the kind of build up to Christmas. There's quite a lot of positive energy around that.
So, Chris, our volunteers, brave volunteers, agreed to waive anonymity and have their personal questionnaire results revealed. We haven't got time to go through everybody, but I think we should have a little bit of a look at what Gary's questionnaire said.
Right, well, Gary's coping was pretty stable across the 2 time periods that were involved, and he'll be relieved to hear that the good coping, the positive coping, far outweigh the negative coping. On the good coping side, he was very good at tapping into support systems, at planning, active, carrying through those plans, a kind of just do it type of philosophy.
Can I just ask you to explain what a negative coping strategy is compared to a positive one?
Well, an interesting example we see a lot with the teachers here is self-blame. Self-blame is a negative one, the tendency to perhaps take on too much responsibility for things that perhaps, you know, aren't your responsibility. Now, I have to say that as far as teachers go, if you're a manager employing a teacher and you had to have some negative coping strategies, then actually being quite high on self-blame is no bad thing, because it does indicate a very high degree of conscientiousness and perhaps taking on the responsibility of making sure you do make a difference with the students.
Right, OK. Anything else in Gary's profile that stood out?
He was also quite high on self-blame.
Right. Loading the responsibility onto yourself, Gary. Well, have you got anything to say to that? I mean, are you surprised by what you heard generally for the whole school again, but perhaps for yourself as well?
I think the results coming after Christmas is a very interesting holiday. I actually believe that Christmas is actually probably about the most stressful holiday of the year, and to call it a holiday is a bit of a misnomer.
Right.
You know, there's lots going on, and often you come back not feeling as refreshed as you do, say, for instance, after the Easter break, possibly. I was pleased to get back to work after my family at Christmas, I have to say. In-laws for 2 weeks was far too stressful.
Oh, gosh, yes. Worse than school. OK, well, let's single out somebody else. Liz, we heard from you earlier. Now, Chris, what did Liz's profile show?
Liz was very good at planning. She was very good at the action coping, very good at carrying through those plans. And actually, those 2 measures were almost twice that of all the other measures we were looking at here. The only other measure that was almost as high as that was, I'm afraid, our self-blame.
Right. You're nodding, Liz.
Well, I think partly because I'm new to the school, started in July, and the subject's been new as well. So I felt that that lesson didn't go right. What can I do right this time? What went wrong? Was it my fault? Was it their fault? Have they not done it? Have I taught it properly? There is lots of self-blame going on there with me, definitely. Sorry.
Well, all week we've been using a host of scientific measures and looking for indicators of stress. And one of the things we've been doing is looking at levels of cortisol in the body. Now, why is cortisol a good indicator of stress? Let's hear from Chris Gibbons.
One of the physiological samples, the one in the chunky tube, measures cortisol levels. And we know that cortisol is related to stress. So the more stressed you are, the higher tends to be the level of cortisol.
Cortisol does a lot of things in the body. It's sometimes referred to as the stress hormone. It reflects and relates to levels of depression and levels of anxiety.
But you just put that in your mouth, chew away in that for 30 seconds to a minute, and then put that back in. If it feels like you want to swallow it, then that's the point to take it out.
The chewed cotton wool swabs were sent daily to King's College Hospital. Once the saliva had been extracted, chemicals were added to each sample. The colour variations were then analysed by computer to determine actual cortisol levels for each individual at different times of the day.
Higher levels of cortisol indicate the person is producing the hormone because they're in a state of stress to suppress the immune system. So it's a fairly reliable indicator that they are in a state of stress.
Now, Alom, you were in charge of the cortisol swabbing of the school. All our guinea pigs agreed to be monitored over the course of a day. Can you give us an overview of the cortisol results?
Well, there's some really good news from the cortisol results, which is that all our teachers had normal levels of cortisol when they were at rest during the weekend, for example. The really interesting thing to emerge was that, without exception, their levels first thing in the morning before school started were really, really high. So that's their anticipatory stress levels. Now, it could have been that we were contributing to that, but what I suspect is that the start of the school day is a stressful period of time for everybody in the school. The other thing that was really interesting was that with the cortisol samples, what you could see very, very clearly is at what points of the day the teachers were stressed. So, Liz, for example, the day we were watching you, something happened to you during period 4. I'm not sure what it was, but you were clearly very upset. Her cortisol levels shot up at the end of period 4.
Liz, can you remember what that was?
I think it's because you guys were in there. No, I had a small group of sixth formers all doing sort of production work. They were logging the editing, and I think probably the peak in my cortisone was probably matched with my blood pressure, in the point at which I was getting frustrated because they knew what they had to do. They knew exactly what was needed. They just weren't getting on with it. Make sure it's saved, otherwise it all goes wrong.
Alom, any other specifics from the cortisol results you want to raise?
We'll be talking to some of the teachers who took part later, but there were some worryingly high levels of cortisol response. Some teachers did seem to secrete lots and lots of cortisol at particular times of the day.
OK, well, we weren't content just to use cortisol. We've also been looking at blood pressure. And Dr. Nadia Wager, you've been our blood pressure expert for the week. Tell us about the way you were measuring blood pressure.
Well, rather than like in the doctors where you just sit down and have a casual blood pressure reading taking, we were actually using an ambulatory blood pressure monitor, which automatically takes blood pressure at a set time interval. And we actually chose 15 minutes, which is quite wearing on teachers, I'm afraid. But it allows you to have some error readings, and you can get a nice spread and look at the different activities. It gave you roughly 4 readings per lesson, so you could see different aspects of what had happened during the course of the day.
Well, we'll get some results for you in just a moment. I just wanted to ask one of our teachers, Tamara, you wore the blood pressure monitor. What was it like having this thing?
Well, it was very visual. So naturally the kids were very curious about it. Every once in a while, it seemed all right, but I think it was about every hour or so, it would be painful. Right. And so, I mean, I'd be handing out papers and then all of a sudden I can't move my arm because it just hurts.
OK, well, let's see about the results. Nadia, can you tell us a bit about what you found out about blood pressure across the school?
OK, I'm going to try and do it without mentioning anybody in particular. Okay. But overall, I only got results for 7 members of staff because, Karen, we didn't manage to do you. Out of those 7, 4 are demonstrating hypertension throughout the whole of the workday. Now, for the vast majority of people, what was brilliant was the fact that during break time, lunchtime, there was also big drops in blood pressure that showed people were still going back to a resting point.
But for some people, Nadia, are you saying that perhaps you'd like to talk to them and recommend that they see their doctor?
I think actually there are some that I'd like to talk to and sort of just say, although I'm not a medical doctor, just to check, because it's the one opportunity you've had to actually be monitored in this way. And so I am saying, obviously it's much higher than it would normally be, but the levels are quite high.
Okay. Any incidents that stood out from the week?
In terms of actually raising stress levels, resourcing issues were one thing. Room inavailability, broken photocopiers, those sorts of issues.
But you could really pick out a rise in blood pressure related to something.
Yeah, and it's a dramatic rise. And having been a teacher and got to the photocopier and found it broken myself, trying to get in the classroom, the children are waiting. Dramatic rise. OK,
well, I think we need to give Gary the right to reply on all of this. What do you make of the blood pressure results?
Well, worrying, actually. I would have anticipated such sort of consistently high levels. I mean, that's certainly something I would want to investigate. The fact that they're linked with resourcing and resourcing issues is not a surprise, actually. The school, as we've mentioned earlier, had been in decline for some period of time, and that decline is reflected in all sorts of things, not least of which is underinvestment in the school, which is really quite considerable. So we do find ourselves quite behind other schools. We're trying to catch up rapidly. And indeed, I've made certain promises to the staff over the last few days, which are going to cost us dearly, but it should address...
Well, you're going to have to keep them now.
I will keep those promises. I will keep those promises. But it's not a surprise that the frustration and therefore the high blood pressure comes through lack of resources. Not a surprise at all.
OK, well, thank you very much. Something else we tried out were stress dots. And the finance manager, Tom Horton, gamely agreed to wear some stress dots while we offered him a massage, courtesy of Simon Thornton. We wanted to see whether the massage would reduce his stress. Let's take a look.
Yes, well, the biodots are just small thermometers. When you're stressed, the blood vessels in the skin constrict and the skin gets cool. And the biodot will register a colour of sort of black. When you relax, the blood vessels in the skin open up. The skin gets much warmer, and the biodot will show the colours in the green or blue.
So let's go back to Alom and see any change in those stress spots, Alom?
Hi, Tom. How are you feeling now?
Well, I should be more relaxed, yes.
Really?
Yes.
Let's see what your stress spot says.
I'm afraid it hasn't changed very much,
It's
has
still
it?
black, isn't it?
It's still black.
Yeah, you're still very tense.
Yes.
OK, well, I think Tom is actually still at work, so he couldn't join us today. But, Terry, I wanted to ask you about the stress dots. This is really your thing.
Well, it probably wasn't long enough to the massage to actually get the sort of relaxation that we would expect to see the physiological changes. In this case, the increased blood flow to the skin, which would warm the skin up and therefore the dot would change colour to indicate that he was more relaxed. But yeah, they were good biofeedback for relaxation techniques and procedures.
Yes, I mean,
so
they
that
might not always be conclusive, but I think in this case, the blood pressure, Nadia, did show a result.
The systolic blood pressure didn't actually drop, but the diastolic dropped by 20 millimetres of mercury, which is a dramatic drop, which I actually took blood pressure twice afterwards, immediately after the massage and then 15 minutes after that. And that 20 mil drop was actually sustained.
OK, what's the difference between those two types of blood pressure?
Systolic is actually your blood pressure when the heart's beating. It's a force against your artery walls. It's at its peak at that point. And the diastolic is between heartbeats when the pressure is the less.
OK, well, the questionnaires that we used were a psychological measure of the stress, and plenty of schools have filled out some sort of stress questionnaire before. But what we've done for the first time ever is to combine that psychological information with new physiological findings based on staff's DNA. Now, this is very new, groundbreaking research from Queen's University Belfast, just in its early stages. But it may be that our DNA can play a role in determining our levels of stress. Queen's University Belfast is a leading research centre in neurology and psychology. It has recently made a breakthrough in identifying why some teachers are more stressed than others.
I don't think I am prone to stress.
Oh, I think I do get stressed.
Have an outward appearance of being laid back.
Stressed.
Laid back, I would say.
Pretty stressed.
I wouldn't say laid back.
Prone to stress.
Pretty laid back.
6. Okay, don't find anything.
So why are some teachers more laid back and others prone to worry? Our DNA may hold the secret to how we respond to stress, reveals Professor Gavin Reynolds.
I'm really excited by this study. We're looking at teachers who are responding to stressful events, looking at their levels of anxiety, relating the genetic factors that we're looking at with psychological measures. We hope very much that this will provide us for the first time with an understanding of potential genetic factors that may combine with environmental stressors to help us understand why people respond in the way they do to stressful events and develop anxiety or not.
The secret of our ability to deal with stress may lie in our levels of the hormone serotonin.
Serotonin is a chemical messenger that communicates between nerve cells in the brain. It's important in a variety of complex behaviours, really. Control of mood, fear, happiness, and so on. And we're looking at the gene for one of the proteins that's important in serotonin function, and that is the 5-HT1A receptor. That gene for the receptor may be in two forms. One form makes people more liable to depression, and we think that maybe that's important in determining levels of anxiety, determining response to stress, and so on.
The first thing I should say is doing the questionnaire and doing the swabs is entirely voluntary. You can opt not to do them. The first one, this is the measure of one's disposition to be anxious, and it just swivels out as a cotton bud at the end. And the idea with this cotton bud is just to put it on the inside cheek and spin it around 360, then back again, 10 times on one cheek, 10 times on the other.
Back in Belfast, Professor Gavin Reynolds analysed the samples.
Well, having taken the swabs containing the cells, we isolate the DNA from the cells and take it through the PCR reaction to make multiple copies of the gene for the 5-HT1A receptor. This is then separated on a gel, and then we can identify the differences within that gene sequence.
OK, well, Chris, this is in the very early stages, but can you tell us in general what you found out about our willing volunteers here?
Yeah, we found out that there was a good distribution of these DNA samples, and actually, whilst we got a very good uptake from almost all the teachers on the DNA measures, in a world of research it would still represent quite a small sample, so we have to add a cautionary note about what interpretation we make on this. But within that sample we had about a dozen teachers who had the so-called protective genotype that should protect them against anxiety.
Right, so that's the laid-back type?
Yes.
OK.
Yeah. And our supposition was that they would be the ones who on coping measures would be coping better because of this tendency, if you like, down to the genes. What was interesting, actually, and very counterintuitive at one level, was that we found that those who had this disposition to cope well with stress actually were much more stressed, significantly more stressed on measures of emotional exhaustion, general health. They used bad coping strategies significantly more than those of the other tendencies. And my take on this is actually those people who maybe are more anxious by nature, they might actually go the extra mile to respond because of that anxiety. It actually prompts them and drives them to cope better. Those who have a tendency actually to cope quite well, or they have a disposition to, they may actually lull themselves into thinking they don't need to prepare as much for a class compared to their more anxious neighbour.
Well, somebody I know who was revealed to have this more laid-back genotype is Jeff Shepherd over here, PE, Geography and Business Studies. Jeff, knowing now your result, that you've got the more laid-back DNA type, but as Chris suggesting there, perhaps they're not really putting into place coping strategies, can you identify with that? It's a tough one. I mean,
it is a tough one. The first thing I'm going to do is phone my identical twin when I get home this evening.
Oh, right.
Yeah, and tell him about the DNA. I don't feel particularly stressed in the classroom. I mean, obviously the results show that perhaps that I am.
AD, shh, one more point.
Jeff's having to work quite hard, it seems, even though there's kind of a surface sort of impression of calm.
Yes, he's pacing about quite a lot and he's up and down between the tables. I think on the outside he looks very relaxed, as he did before, but all of the signs indicate that there is actually quite a high level of stress underneath.
In Jeff's case, he was... he used some good coping strategies, his bad coping strategies in terms of things like denying issues that may be a source of stress for him. He admitted that that was perhaps used more than it should. What we found in the teachers that seemed to cope very well, irrespective of their genotype, is they were quite good at just getting it off their chest, drawing a line underneath it and letting go of it in some way. And with Jeff, there was a very low measure on this ability just to be able to express the issues that may be a source of angst, may not be in work, may not be in the class as an experienced teacher, it probably isn't in the class, but there may be other issues that just aren't being vented in some way that it would be useful to do that.
Jeff, do you want to say anything back to that? I mean, how do you de-stress?
Play golf.
Right.
And for a few holes I do distress, then I get to a third hole and the drive goes over the farmer's field. I watch football. I watch Burnley. That's probably a major cause of stress in my life, actually, when it comes to that. I just go out with friends. I watch TV. I don't feel particularly stressed in the classroom, that's for certain. Okay. As I say, I think the main stress in teaching is medium and long-term targets.
Well, stress can often be exacerbated by the buildings we inhabit, and King's Langley School here is a real jumble of buildings, mainly dating from the 60s and 70s. And we asked architect Gillian Horn to walk round the school and tell us what she thought.
School buildings and the built environment can really contribute to a sense of well-being, but also to stress. Now here, the first point to mention is that the sense of arrival is pretty poor here, and it's a jumble of buildings and a car park to get to the entrance. I'd suggest that we get rid of these cars so that you can have a clear point to the entrance, and then we'll go and have a look and see some improvements there as well. When you found the entrance, you're then faced with the problem of actually having to go upstairs to the reception, which is unusual and difficult for the school, for students and for staff and for visitors alike. But I've got a potential idea for solving that over here. One of the biggest issues I have with this school is that it has no physical heart. And a heart can really add to a sense of well-being and identity for the school. Now this space here, which is the external courtyard, is the closest thing that the school currently has for a heart. And they have actually made efforts to make it a softened space and a nice place to be, and it's the main gathering space at break times. There's the planted external planters here and the new paving. But my ideas for the future, with some funding, would be potentially to cover over this space so it does become an internal courtyard. And then to move the entrance that we've already looked at as being a problem and putting it into where the staff room currently is, so it leads directly into this central space. And that would actually give the school a different sense of organisation and a whole different feel. One of the great assets of 60s schools is actually the amount of glazing that they have. But here, as in actually many other schools, they've fallen into the common trap of keeping their blinds closed and putting the lights on, even when it's a cloudy day. So one easy way of increasing well-being would be to open those blinds and to turn the lights off when you can. Whilst the first courtyard was really nice with the planting, this one here leaves quite a lot to be desired. Here we've got the problem of lots of student bags and trainers being left outside. And I understand that's partly because their lockers at the moment are in some of the classroom blocks where there's no access at break times. So one thing I'd suggest would be to bring the lockers outside, put them under some of the covered walkways and under these canopies here where they're protected. And it can also help reduce bullying and vandalism in these vulnerable areas.
Well, Gary, some excellent ideas there from Gillian. What do you make of them?
Well, it's very interesting to hear her talk about the entrance to the school. I mean, when I first arrived 4.5 years ago, it's the first thing that I noticed, or rather the lack of an entrance to the school. Again, it reflects on the under-resourcing. We have had a bid in for several years now for a new entrance, not quite where the architect suggested, but certainly a new entrance to the school, an area of reception for students separate from other visitors, student services, if you will. And some of the ideas about sort of enclosed atriums, sort of perhaps a Louvre-style glass pyramid, nice. Sounds absolutely fabulous, absolutely fabulous. As with all of these suggestions, the financial issues are quite considerable. But there were some nice suggestions there which would cost very little, but that could have a big impact. The simple one about the blinds and the light was an obvious one, yes.
OK, Morag Kane, you're in charge of Hertfordshire's wellbeing programme for schools. How do you think a building can impact on a school's well-being?
Greatly. It becomes your home for quite a large amount of time in a way. Teachers spend so much time in the building. If the lights aren't right, the space isn't right, they're not going to be able to function as they would like to do so. So yes, it's going to have a great impact. And it's one of the top factors that cause stress to staff.
Right, OK. Well, poor buildings can often mean a noisy environment as well. And one of the experts that we brought in, Christella Antoni, is an expert on the voice. Christella, you often see teachers back in your consulting rooms. What did you make of coming into school and seeing teachers at work?
Lots of interesting points to pick up on, actually. The blood pressure being high throughout the day, I think could be related to the fact that teachers perform throughout the day like no other profession, really. It's very rare. So whereas a performer on the stage might be stressed for those couple of hours of performance, the rest of the day they're not performing, and so the blood pressure is likely to go down, but teachers really are on it the whole time.
Visual light is a part of the electromagnetic spectrum, so the whole thing, radio waves, microwaves, infrared.
Because she is a Canadian lady, she has high vowels and an element in her voice which is twang, which is fantastic for carrying. So her vowels are somewhere up there and they kind of bounce off the roof of her mouth. That will always carry acoustically.
All right, people on the side, Dale, out. Don't act surprised, you know exactly what you did.
In any time of stress, the larynx has a tendency to close, and closing in the larynx means that it gets tight around there. Once things start getting tight and you've got noise to carry over and information to impart, all of a sudden your voice can start closing down as well. And that over time has a big effect on the larynx. And once teachers tend to get voice problems, they tend to hang around for a long time.
Right, OK, so it's just so important, guys, sitting over here, look after your voices. Chris, can I come to you? Because one of the lessons that we saw you teaching was a lower ability maths class. And actually, we did feel that you were working awfully hard but not getting a lot of response. It might have been because the cameras were there, but do you normally get a good response?
I normally get a response. It's not necessarily a good one or a focused one. So actually knocking that response round to the response that I want is sometimes a bit of a challenge. You've got 5 minutes to get these filled in, starting from now.
When the activity doesn't appear to be matched to the ability of the children you're working with, it's much more difficult to engage them. Chris obviously has an expectation of what he wants out of the lesson, but I'm not sure that the students do. And that mismatch, the more you press on, the more you try and get that engagement with the pupils, the more stressful it becomes.
They were quite fazed by the change of classroom environment.
Yes. OK. Now, what about teachers themselves? What do they do to de-stress after a hard day in the classroom?
I actually live with another teacher at this school, so we kind of de-stress by offloading onto each other a bit.
We talk and about our days, and even that in itself is a big help.
De-stressing, I like it when I can say, that's it, enough is enough for today.
Quite a few NQTs, younger members of staff, and we go and socialise, relax, unwind at the end of the week or Monday or during the school week.
I play semi-professionally jazz guitar, and also I'm a musician at my local church.
I try to get to the gym at least 3 times a week. People have said to me, how do you fit in the time? Well, I fit in the time because I know the benefits to me are enormous, even if it's just simply the fact that I will sleep better because of it.
Well, some interesting responses there. Alan, what do you reckon? Kind of split between those that go down the pub, talk to their friends, and those that hot-foot it to the gym?
Well, there seemed to be a bit of a gender split between the men going out and doing lots of physical activity and the women...
James, I'm not sure James was saying that.
No.
OK, well, we also laid on a little bit of pampering this week. On Tuesday, for example, we suggested to some staff that they could try out yoga. Some had tried it before, some hadn't. Graham, the caretaker, he was a yoga virgin, but Liz, you joined in, you'd done it before. So let's see how they got on during their lunch hour.
Otherwise, if you can imagine, if we lift the hips off, we're not actually getting that stretch. So if we...
Sue, you've done yoga and meditation, I believe. How do you think the class is going?
Well, it's very difficult to take a bunch of beginners. She's doing a very good job starting from just simple relaxation, but now getting them to do a bit of stretching, and I'm sure they're all feeling bits of their body that they didn't know were there. These instructions probably look quite simple if you've never done it. You know, put your hand here, put your leg there, breathe this, feel the flesh on your sitting bone. But actually, when you try and do all those things at once, it is taking up a lot of your mind, and so you haven't got time to be thinking about everything else. From that point of view, it's very good.
Well, we should take well-being, I think, quite seriously. Morag, I want to ask you, I mean, what can a school do to enhance well-being, apart from perhaps having yoga at lunchtime?
I think they need to come to terms with what is causing their stress and pressure. And then the main thing is to work together as a whole staff or in groups of staff to try and make a difference. You're going to know as a staff the best ways of dealing with your own problems. I can't tell you, and I suspect not many other experts can tell you exactly how to cure your problems. You've got the answers inside you. So I think the staff need to talk to find out how best they can do that for themselves.
Now, Gary, you have actually gone some way to help improve life at the school. I know you've got a woman coming in to do teas and coffees in the mornings.
Yes.
Why did you decide to do that?
Well, it's following on for the wellbeing programme. Quite often, of course, it's simple things that can change the quality of people's lives, little things. And if you have a very busy full day, as teachers do, being able to dash into the staff room at morning break and have your coffee there ready for you just means you've got those few minutes to relax, which the blood pressure samples were suggesting was very, very important. That was a simple thing. We have a sort of discussion session that we run sort of once a month on a Friday afternoon, a couple of glasses of wine and some nibbles, and we have a frank, open discussion, and things have arrived from that, such as the toilets in the staff room were awful, and we had to put aside the money to get them sorted.
Right, OK. What would be your next stress buster if you could do one more thing?
Well, without a shadow of a doubt, it's the resources in the school, our absolute paramount objective for us.
Pat, your work with the Teacher Support Network, What do teachers say to you about well-being provision in their schools in general?
It varies enormously, and I think that schools that have started down the path of taking their well-being seriously are ones that make improvements generally more rapidly than those that don't. I think it's really fantastic you've done this exercise, and what I'd be interested in is coming back here in a year's time, because I think your awareness of stressors and what creates that will have rapidly, enormously improved. And I think you'll find that quite a lot of the way you organise the school changes as a result of that. What we find in schools that have been in our programmes for 2 or 3 years and have taken it really seriously is that actually the way the school is organised is from a first principle of, well, how will this affect our well-being as a working team here? And that's a really good place to start.
OK, well, now let's take a look at some of those moments during the week when I expect our subjects probably wondered why on earth they let a film crew anywhere near the school.
It just felt to me that it wasn't indicative of a normal day.
How's it going? How's it feel to be all wired up like this?
Bionic woman.
As long as I don't move today, I'll be fine.
You'll be fine, you'll be fine.
Strawberry.
Yum yum.
Your ones always look dirtier than everyone else's.
That's what I am, I'm afraid. It's years of strong coffee.
He wants us to show our stomachs on telly.
Anything
I
for a bit of
think
fun.
no, I can't do that.
The vest won't inflate though.
No, you'll be fine.
I go floating around the ceiling, no?
No different like Father Christmas.
4,168.
Yes! Result. Competitive, are we? Just a tad.
What did you really feel about it? Is that a delicate question?
Well, if anyone can say what we really think.
That's enough.
James?
Priceless.
Are you going to share with us what you really thought?
No.
Well, we don't have much time left, but I want to get a feel for what the school has got out of this, what you thought happened. I mean, let me come to you, Gary, first. Thank you so much. It's just been a tremendous week. What are you going to take away from it?
I think the increased awareness, talking about it, living this concept of well-being and stress, or looking at stress for a week, means that we're all so much more aware. And I think once you're aware, as some of our colleagues have discussed this evening, you've got some chance of tackling it rather than just sweeping it under the carpet. So, yeah, awareness, I guess.
OK. Emily, we focused quite a lot on you. I loved your music lessons. I really wanted to join in. You haven't been teaching for very long, but do you think that kind of acknowledging that there's going to be stress involved over the coming years is going to help you combat it?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, teaching is a stressful profession, and there are so many changes, and you always get things thrown at you, this week being a prime example. And I think the fact that if you acknowledge that you're going to be stressed, you can deal with it a lot easier.
Well, a few words from the audience. I believe we have the Chair of Governors over there.
Thank you very much. Stress is such a buzzword these days. Everyone talks about being stressed, and everybody probably means something differently. But to have had a scientific approach to stress, and for the staff to have been able to see the way that they reacted to their everyday working life, I think has been extremely important. And I hope that by talking about it and all being able to share in the experience, it's really going to help us.
OK. So finally, a very big thank you to the school and to our experts. Thank you for joining us. Goodbye.